It's good to know.
That's
what, ability of a good sound system, I guess, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Or a better sound system.
Because you can hear us and we can hear you now, so.
Does that mean
Are we ready?
we're on?
Okay, I'll call this joint work session to order. Will you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Next item on the agenda is public comment. Rob, do you have any comments tonight? Is there anybody online that has a public comment? Hearing none, I'll move on to item number 3, review of the upcoming City Council and URA Board action items. And 3A is presentation of draft 2023 housing production strategy. Is this you, Carolyn?
Yes, I will be handing off to one of our consultants though. Good evening, everyone. As you stated, we're going to hear a little presentation on the draft 2023 housing production strategy this evening. This is required by the state of Oregon for communities with populations of over 10,000 persons. And the idea is that the establishment of a strategy will help communities to meet their housing needs statewide. So that would definitely benefit all Oregonians. In 2021, the City Council authorized an application for a successful grant to the Department of Land Conservation and Development to prepare this work. And since then, the work has been ongoing with the services of 3J Group and FCS Group. And the draft housing production strategy is now ready for some presentation. We'll be building on progress that you've made to date. I outlined some of that in the staff report, and Tim Wood will be talking about that as well. The Planning Commission is scheduled to review the draft HPS on March 14th, and the required public hearing on the project is scheduled for your April 18th meeting. That means that after your evening meeting tonight, tomorrow, I will be working on getting something to the planning administrator that she can take on to the Planning Commission, and then we will present again to them. So that being said, it's probably important to note that the grant specifies that the city will prepare a resolution for your consideration. That's what you will end up looking at on the 18th. And final closeout of the project work is to be submitted to DLCD no later than May 31st, 2023. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Tim Wood. Tim is with FCS Group, working with 3J, and he will do the talking. He may be handing back and forth to me a little bit on a few things, and I in turn may ask for some feedback from Jim Hosley or Roger Craddock on an item or two. So anyway, this is Tim, and he will be presenting the PowerPoint. Tim?
Hi, thanks, Carolyn. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to me talk tonight and for your feedback. Carolyn did a really good job of introducing the project, so I won't go into too much detail apart from what we have in the presentation. But yes, suffice it to say, this is a great opportunity for the city to take a look at different policy options that it can consider over the next 10 years. It's basically a roadmap for housing policies that we've laid out for you. So with that, I'll share my screen, hoping that you all can see the presentation here. Can you all see this?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So the agenda for what I'll be talking about tonight is basically a review of the housing studies that have been completed to date and what we're looking at with respect to the HPS. We'll be reviewing the 2020 HNA. We'll be reviewing recent accomplishments that the city has made with respect to housing policy. We'll go over the 8 recommended strategies that we've put together and outlined for the city, and then we'll have a little bit of discussion to make sure that those strategies meet your needs and that they sound good to you and something that you can implement going forward. So to kind of expand on what Carolyn talked about, there are two major housing studies that the state requires cities to complete. One is the Housing Needs Analysis, or HNA, and you recently completed one of those. So that's not really relevant for tonight, apart from just the data being, helping to inform what policies we recommend. And then there's the housing production strategy, which is relatively new. It's part of a larger state push for housing policies to be implemented at the local level. It's specific to trying to help cities address the housing needs that are identified in an HNA. And within the housing production strategy, there's recommended timeframes for implementation. So if we think a policy will be pretty easy to implement, we'll say between 1 and 3 years. If it's going to be a longer term policy that's going to take more outreach and consideration and due diligence on the city's end, we'll give a longer range than that. But that's the sort of the defining line between these two types of reports. Will be focused exclusively on the HPS with respect to the deliverables that we provide to you. So to review the relevant findings from the housing needs analysis, Coos Bay is projected to add about 1,244 people over the next 20 years. Renters are experiencing a supply shortage there, with 26.5% of rental households experiencing severe rent burden, which is a condition where that household is spending greater than 50% of their income on rent. Home ownership is in high demand in Coos Bay, and higher among upper income households, which is true of most cities in the state. There are 480 acres of buildable residential land in the Coos Bay urban growth boundary, and that's part of a buildable land inventory that's done from an HNA. So there's your kind of top level data. A little bit more delving into the housing needs analysis findings. Identified in figure 4.11 of the HNA, a variety of housing types are needed for the city, of course, since renters will probably need different housing types than owners. With that 1,244 resident expansion that the city will see over the next 20 years, that's going to require the city to, it's going to require the city to accommodate 604 new dwelling units of all kinds of types, so single family detached, apartments, that kind of thing. And with respect to land availability versus, kind of land need, assuming that those buildable acres that we highlighted in the last slide are available for development, the city has enough land inside of its urban growth boundary to meet the housing demand over the next 20 years. Of course, that component of willing sellers is always going to be a bit of a catch point, but suffice it to say there is a good amount of land that's available inside of the urban growth boundary that's buildable. So the city over the last several years has done a pretty remarkable job of implementing a lot of really forward-thinking housing policies. I work all over the state, and this is probably the most complete list that I've seen in terms of a city's ability to meet its, the housing crisis head on. So just to kind of briefly go over what the city has accomplished already, streamlining ADU, that's accessory dwelling unit, and duplex regulations, partnering with private and nonprofit developers to help move along needed housing development, encouraging the community housing action team, engaging the community housing action team on the Housing Trust Fund, exploration of new urban renewal area focused on housing development, which is pretty innovative, limits on short-term vacation rentals, which of course up and down the coast is a major issue. And a lot of our clients on the coast are struggling with that. Authorization and standards for cottage clusters, which again is something that we're seeing is really popular, but hasn't always implemented in city code. So it's impressive that you've moved on that. allowing for tri and quadplexes in single family zones, so kind of bringing it up to kind of the bleeding edge of that sort of development. Multi-unit residential development standards for citywide use, which is really impressive. Minimum density standards in all residential zones. Reduction of minimum lot sizes. Allowance of single room occupancies. Streamlining land use and permit processing requirements. Density bonuses for development of deed restricted affordable housing, and exploration of tax exemption programs for multi-unit affordable housing. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on as well. But you know, again, really impressive, innovative, and an ambitious list that the city has already put together. So these are the policies that you've already implemented with respect to housing. And so what we're going to put together here for the housing production strategy is just an outline for 8 more housing policies that we think might serve the city well based on what we're seeing from the housing needs analysis, our stakeholder outreach that we've completed for this project, and just other, you know, kind of more recent housing data that we've put together for Coos Bay. So these strategies are really the backbone of an HPS. You can find them on the document pages 21 through 28 if you want to read a little bit more about what we've provided, you know, in terms of our analysis of these policies. What we'll do here is just give you an overview of what the policies are, but in the document itself, there's a little bit more in terms of, you know, implementation timeline, the magnitude of impact, and that kind of thing. So the first is continuing to develop partnerships with nonprofits for housing development. So you've got a couple of good examples here, and I'll probably ask Carolyn to chime in to give a little bit more detail. But we've got NeighborWorks Umpqua, you know, working with them on housing rehabilitations, individual developers and private nonprofits for multifamily housing. And Carolyn, I don't know if you want to chime in and provide a couple of other detailed examples of what the city's already done in this.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. There's so many of them. I'm going to try to start small and work up. The city worked with Heidi Sauce on the mixed-use residential commercial building in the Front Street area. There was help provided to her in developing a grant to Main Street to fund a lot of that project. A lot of time was spent with Red Moon Development and Construction regarding a number of projects that they have in the pipeline. The plumbers, Wes and Pamela Plummer, they were responsible for a number of new housing construction projects in the area, and we worked with them on their projects. Adam Rutherford, the 9-plex multifamily unit on South Wasson behind the Empire Fire Station, that was city-owned property that the city made available. The city also was instrumental in assisting the development of with Rob Crocker, his work on the Tioga Hotel and the Buggy Building, those multi-dwelling units. Cities partnered basically with Coos County, Northwest Housing Alternatives, and Oregon Coast Community Action on a low-income housing project. I think if Jim or Roger wants to jump in on any others that maybe I missed, which I'm sure I did, I think that would be helpful. I think that the council's fairly cognizant of all the work that you've done to help bring housing to the area. So definitely something to be proud of.
Well, Carolyn, I think you've covered most of them. I think the only one that comes to mind in addition to that was the City Council provided land to Habitat for Humanity, and they're going to be tearing down the blighted structures on that facility, on that property. In fact, they already have, and planning for a duplex. Great,
that's great. So basically, I mean, to take off the rest of this slide, the bottom line is you have partnered with individual developers and private nonprofits, not only for multi-unit housing, but other smaller housing types. The duplex is a good example. One of the things that is suggested is that you continue exploring partnership opportunities And one particular idea that we had in mind was the consideration of the vacant property registration program as a resource. It identifies many units in the city that we know are vacant. They're registered. I believe the police department handles that now. But it could be possible upon some investigation to see whether or not that information could be moved in or used in another way to identify for nonprofits and for the city and even for-profit folks opportunities for housing that were going through a foreclosure process. Those would require some rehabilitation. Maybe some of them are in bad shape, could be torn down and rebuilt, but that is definitely something that the city could explore. You already have that program in place. You've already got a list of where all those properties are. You're already in communication with those lenders or whoever's responsible for maintaining the units. So that's something as an option you might suggest exploring. I would note too that the Planning Commission was also very supportive of your work with Habitat for Humanity and was encouraging for any additional opportunities like that to be considered. And this vacant property registration program potentially could be another resource for that kind of smaller project. So I'll step out and I'll let Jim jump back in here.
Great, and thank you, Carolyn. And that's all to say, this is something that the city's already doing a great job of, and what we would encourage, through this document is just to kind of continue that collaborative sort of atmosphere around housing, and just kind of continue to let that produce, needed housing in the city. So, one of our major recommended policies to consider. Next would be to encourage medium and high density development on medium and high density zones. So this one's pretty straightforward. Just basically, and again, since this is sort of just recommendations for, beginning these conversations, because we know that all of these policies will require more process. What we're saying here is just to make sure that your medium and high density lands are being used for their intended purposes, and just finding ways, in city, throughout, the different apparatus of the city to see if you can help encourage developers that own and want to develop on that land to not go with the lowest density product and try to produce some more, especially to meet rental demand in the city. So trying to get them to develop plexes or, potentially apartment type development through different methods. Here we've listed off a few: density bonuses, reduction of landscaping requirements, reduced parking requirements, that kind of thing. But again, whatever ends up making it through process is what we're looking for here. So. Again, just sort of starting that conversation and trying to figure out ways that the city can move in that direction. Providing pre-approved middle housing designs. So through conversations with our partners at the state, the Department of Land Conservation and Development, we've learned that there will likely be financial assistance provided to develop these pre-approved middle housing designs. And by the way, in case this isn't clear, middle housing is sort of a catch-all for anything that's not single-family detached. So in particular, you're looking at plexes, but potentially, apartment-type developments as well. There are some examples throughout the Pacific Northwest. Eugene has one that deals mostly with accessory dwelling units, but from what we understand, Spokane in Washington has these sorts of pre-approved middle housing designs. And the purpose of this is to provide developers with something that complies with city standards and make sure that development review isn't an onerous process. That here are development examples that fit within our parameters, and having those kind of loaded up and ready to go for potential developers is just going to make that process of design and design review much more streamlined. So we expect to see some movement at the state level for financial assistance, and so having this policy included in your HPS is going to put you kind of at the front of the line for that financial assistance. So certainly this is probably one that we'll be looking a little bit further down the road on, but I think it's a good one to just make sure that it's listed and the city is keeping its eye on when that grant funding becomes available from the state. Developing criteria and process for identifying land to upzone. So again, kind of one of these policies that looks at a larger conversation, because identifying land to upzone is never going to be cut and dry, and we certainly wouldn't deign to mandate it or make recommendations for where that could happen in the city. But one of the major issues that we found in our stakeholder outreach was developers who were interested in bringing multifamily to Coos Bay, but didn't find a lot of opportunities in terms of land, like buildable land opportunities. So this would make it more explicit to bring some of that middle density zoning, which represents over half of the buildable land, the buildable residential land in the city, bringing that up and just kind of bumping up the dwelling units per acre that are allowed on those. So you see here we've kind of outlined two ways of going about it that we would recommend you consider. Expanding the development code annexation criteria to specifically address multi-unit development relative to location. So just as annexation occurs, making sure that you're considering where to put potential higher density land. And then considering valuation of city properties for change of zoning. So, kind of taking a look at what you've got on the books and seeing, does it make sense to upzone a particular property and figure out a way to make a deal with the developer so that there's some deed restricted units or that they all meet certain affordability requirements, that kind of thing. So again, just kind of suggesting that this conversation start at some point in the near future, and that you go through the appropriate process to make sure that it's a good process and you find the right places to upzone. And some examples here, we identified that, it's probably just helpful to take a look at the zoning map so you can see what we would recommend is taking a look at this middle density residential land use type. And so you can see that you've got large swaths of this, kind of in various areas of the city. And so just take a look at what you've got, what's developable and vacant now, and kind of where is it, where would it make sense to try to aim for more apartments. Ensuring that the zoning code is clear and objective, and this is kind of a long-standing requirement of Oregon land use law, so it's pretty easy to assume that it is mostly, but what we're suggesting here is just making sure that you go through your zoning and development requirements and that kind of thing, and just removing discretionary or subjective criteria as much as possible to make sure that, again, the process of permitting is as streamlined as possible so that there's as little lag time as possible. Also eliminating procedures that discourage housing through unreasonable cost or delay, again, kind of just streamlining that code. And some things that we've enumerated in other areas of the HPS, but some that we haven't, just some examples: setbacks, building height restrictions, land use application criteria, that kind of thing. So just suggesting, I think periodic review of the zoning code, basically.
If I could interject here, Tim, I'd like to also point out that there are procedures that developers need to go through once they have the zoning blessing of height restrictions, land use application. Folks then have to go through the engineering department. There's various permitting requirements and things the engineering department has to do, same with building. And so there could be value in taking a look at some of the procedures related to building and engineering permits and to see if or how those could be streamlined as well. That technically is not a zoning issue, but it definitely is an issue for the individual who's wanting to develop their property. So Just one more point. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Carolyn. Develop criteria. Sorry, the next policy is to develop criteria to allow single unit and duplexes on small commercial lots. So this is like a pretty targeted policy. And again, just to sort of start the conversation here, but on some parcels, within the city, they're likely too small and not ideally located enough in a commercial zone to accommodate commercial use. What we're recommending here is just consider that some of those parcels could be used for residential. And, the idea behind that is, one, to make sure that you're efficiently using your land, two, to kind of provide housing in commercial areas so that way, folks that are living there, they have access to the shop, the post office, that kind of thing. So from a locational perspective and from an efficient land use perspective, and we've got some examples here that we'll kind of go through. So we're talking about the entirety of the commercial zone just by looking at the color, but what we're really talking about is specific types of commercial parcels. And some good examples are here. I'm hoping my cursor will show up. So this one here, which is quite small and probably not likely to develop as commercial, and here at 130 Wall, again, a pretty small parcel. And, you can just imagine that folks that are living on these parcels would be quite happy to be as close to the services that are provided along Newmark and the like as well. So just a great way to efficiently use land. Our second to last policy that we recommend is amending the minimum lot size and building setback requirements. So kind of getting into the nitty gritty of the way that development code is put together. And, kind of specifically, we're looking at revisiting the zero lot line concept for residentially zoned property and refining through the development code process. So just starting that policy discussion and specifically kind of recommending allowing that sort of use outright, reducing landscaping standards, again, expanding lot coverage, and only requiring building and fire code setbacks. So still allowing for the obvious needs of a functioning city, but to at least consider that in some cases zero lot line might make sense. It should be noted, of course, that zero lot line residential development is conditionally allowed in low density areas, but what we're looking at is maybe making it allowed by right in certain circumstances. Finally, another policy is to start considering property tax abatement strategies. And what we're talking about specifically here is multifamily property tax exemptions, or MUPT. But there are a huge suite of property tax abatement strategies that you can use to incentivize housing development. And there's a long list that's provided by the Department of Land Conservation and Development, and we've done a pretty good job of distilling that. So we're happy to provide that as well, so you kind of get a good sense of the full menu of options. But basically, just allowing providing another tool in the city's tool belt to help incentivize the development of needed housing. And of course, this wouldn't be writ large. It could be targeted at certain projects. Again, through those partnerships that you develop in step one with developers or nonprofits, that kind of thing. So, could be targeted specifically towards deed restricted units that are restricted to a certain percentage of area median income, nonprofit developers, needed housing types like multifamily, that kind of thing. So you got options, and just to kind of start considering that and have a conversation about how the city would want to deploy this kind of tool, so that way when the opportunity shows up, it's not, we're not starting from square one on those conversations. So that policy concludes the list. So with that, of course, we would love your feedback, questions, etc.
Thank you, Tim and Carolyn. Just right now, since you were just discussing number 8, Doesn't that go hand in hand with the number 2, with incentivizing medium and high density?
I think it is one of those incentivizing medium and high density. So you could probably knock out both of those at once, but I think incentivizing medium and high density development on medium and high density land, you've got a handful of other tools at your disposal that could achieve that. I'm thinking about, maybe specific development requirements, that kind of thing, where I think the tax abatement's probably a little more targeted, but that is a good point. Those are definitely the same, the Venn diagram there is definitely, there's overlap.
Thank you. And Carolyn, when he was talking about updating the 2020 buildable land inventory, didn't we already discuss that DLCD wouldn't let us change things based on speculation?
Well, that meeting was, a week ago? And the work that's been done here, was not based on the draft 2022 HNA. It's based on the 2020 HNA and that buildable land inventory. So they are comfortable with the city using that data from the 2020 document for this effort.
So I got a few questions. So first of all, Tim, can you tell us about FCS? I know 3J Consulting's out of Beaverton, but can you tell us a little bit about your company?
Oh yeah, I'd be happy to. We are based, the main office is based in Redmond, Washington, so Seattle area, but our office is in Lake Oswego. So we're a local firm. We work in all sorts of different government issues, mainly with utility rates and system development charges, but myself and my colleague Todd Chase work also in the urban planning and economic impact space. So we've done a lot of housing studies in the last 5 or so years in Oregon, Washington, Arizona, and we've been working in this kind of land use and within the Oregon land use code for a couple decades now. And FCS is celebrating its 35th year this year. We got about 35 people working for the company, so pretty small firm, but yeah, we're pretty proud of our work.
Well, I can tell you I like the report, and I'm pleased to hear that you're impressed about how well the city has done with implementing the housing policies. It's nice to hear. So good job for our staff. I'm pleased. The thing that I'm concerned about in this report is that, and this was the same thing I was concerned about with our last housing needs analysis for the 2022 that we did not initiate or adopt. Basically, it says that we have enough buildable lands within our urban growth boundary, and I don't agree with that commentary. And I would like to see that removed from this draft report because, in my opinion, we've talked about, and so the Planning Commission, we talked about expanding the UGB. And in fact, I know Chelsea, our planner, has reached out to Jill Rolfe, the Coos County planner, about initiating those steps to have that happen. So I hate to have something in here that's going to say the opposite of what we are trying to accomplish. So, that's on page 10. It states that right there, that there's a significant buildable land supply within urban growth boundaries. And I think those are subjective commentary that we have proven with some people like Al Johnson. If you want to read his report, it states there's a lot of unknowns out there that can change that perspective. So I'd like to see those removed. I
think we could remove that language to be consistent with the way that the city is approaching it. I think that's mostly background language, just to kind of say, hey, we read through your reports and here's the highlights. But I think we could probably remove that language.
Yeah, and I think it was on 30. I'm not sure if I got pages 33 also. I'm not sure if that was mentioned in there. I was impressed with the back pages that mention things that should be addressed and changed for our planning, and so that's impressive. So anyway, yeah, if we could get that done, I would like to see that removed. I'm not sure how the rest of the council feels.
I'll make sure that that's okay with DLCD, but I'm pretty sure it will be. And if that's the case, then yeah, I'll call through.
Tim, can you bring up that slide when you were talking about updating the, what was it? the buildable lands inventory?
Well, I don't have a BLI slide, I don't think. We've
One
got,
of them talks
Yeah,
about
you
it though.
referenced it. It's towards the beginning.
okay. I think I know what you're talking about. Is it this one? With the last bullet there?
No. It was in one of your
One of the 8
This is
strategies.
it. 480 acres. You just had it,
no,
Tim.
that wasn't it.
Wasn't it?
No.
Okay.
No, it was that.
Keep going. Keep going.
While we're looking for that, I want to say that I am impressed as we continue to delve more and more into this and watch what other municipalities and counties are doing. I appreciate that these are incentives versus the hammer, because in some states, I think they're looking at taxing and other things that seem to be pretty negative for property owners, and I like that we're incentivizing the development of more housing.
Yeah, this
Heading
this
that
type of
direction.
report is a lot more fun to work on than the than the subjective sort of land use part. This is a little more positive and a little more forward looking. Is this the one? Because I see that there is an explicit reference to the buildable land inventory
No,
here.
it's not that one. It's the one where you talked about us looking at making changes to. It's all right. You don't. I can talk to you later about it.
Okay, yeah, I'd be happy to field any questions and make sure that we get specific about that because I would love to make sure that we're consistent.
But
Tim, with
Tim,
that said, would you mind, I don't think we got this PowerPoint presentation in our materials. Would you mind sending this to us or sending it to staff? Staff has it? Okay, you can share it with us. Great.
Yeah.
so Tim, on number 4, again, going back, that one that you had up, what's interesting about that, I think we need to remember when we look at the UGB, future annex properties and city properties could be considered for upzoning options, and that would tie in with our expansion of our UGB.
Yeah, I mean, and just in terms of annexation too, I think it's just a good thing to kind of keep in mind as you take control of some land that you have the opportunity to rezone. It's just a good thing to kind of have up front in mind, I think.
Any other questions or comments for Tim or Carolyn?
Well, so Tim, those back pages, number 46 through 60, that address things about how to change the zoning and stuff, is that in these 8 strategies?
Yes, if there were mentioned, although I'll make a note to make sure that that's the case. I don't have the document in front of me right now, but I will make sure that you said it was page 48.
Let me go back here. It's going to be page 60, 59, 58. Those are the ones that you basically say in here. Zoning and code changes, create cottage clusters, reduce regulatory impediments, reduce regulatory impediments, reduce minimum size lots, all that's on those back pages. I think it's incorporated in these 8 strategies. I just want to make sure, because I think they're important for us to start moving on. Zoning and code changes that you're suggesting that we...
I think I know what you're talking about. It's like a table, right? And some of it's color coded. Yeah. So some of those are things I think the city's already done. It's just, this is kind of, that's the table that we usually start with. And we say, here's the menu of options. And, we realize, okay, well, the city's done a number of these, but we'll keep the table whole so that way we recognize the things that the city has done. But yeah, if they're included on that table, either the city's already done it or they're included in these strategies.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you, Tim. Thank you, Carolyn,
Yeah, thank you.
for
Thank you.
your time this evening.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, and we'll look forward to seeing you in April.
Okay.
Have a good evening. Thank you.
Moving on, Item 3B, discussion regarding alley between South Wasson Street and South Kamen Street. Is that Kamen? Sorry. Is that you, Jennifer?
That is me.
Okay.
Okay. So what I'd like to do is just go right into the staff report, or excuse me, into the PowerPoint, because everything that's in the staff report is in the PowerPoint presentation. So with that, there we go. So tonight, we're going to talk about what the issue is, and I think most of you know the issue is that we have a traveled way that is migrated outside of the platted right-of-way, and it's infringing on private property. I'll provide an overview of the site. I have pictures. We're going to talk about the overview of the work needed to remedy the situation. We'll provide a status to date and a staff recommendation. So first off, we'll talk about the site. So what we have is we have two platted alleyways, and the alleyways are defined by those dark black lines. And we have an alleyway that kind of runs east-west-ish. That's a 20-foot wide right-of-way. And then north-south is a 16-foot wide right-of-way. You can see from the aerial where the traveled way has crossed into private property there at the Underwood property. That's 131 South Wasson. Just some infrastructure that's within the platted right-of-way is a manhole. And if we do regrade, that will have to be lowered to match the street grades. There's a slope along that western edge there with that yellow shaded area. That'll have to be removed, and most likely a retaining wall will be installed. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. But really, the alley intersection, how it is platted today, is just too narrow to accommodate large equipment and vehicles. So pictures. So what I've done is on the right-hand side, I've tried to show you where we were taking the picture, and the left-hand side is the picture. So this is right behind 137, 141. Mr. Topics has come to speak to you several times about this issue. He is the property owner there, 137, which is the neighbor, he's the neighbor to 131, which is where the property is being encroached. So this is looking north, and you can kind of see where it's starting to turn onto the property. This gets us a little closer. So this is kind of looking right at the intersection of the two alleys, and there's a white line that's not exact, but that's the approximate, let's see, northwest property corner of 131 South Wasson. And then this is looking down the alley towards South Wasson. And this is standing at South Wasson and looking east, and to the right there on that picture is where the house of 131 South Wasson is. This was some tape that was put out by the fencing contractor that 131 South Wasson procured to show you the approximate fence location, which is along his property lines. And you can see it just pretty much takes out that whole turn. It's just another view looking north. So what would it take to move this traveled way into the platted intersection? We'd have to lower the grade of that. We'd have to regrade the whole area that's in red over there. We'd have to lower the existing manhole to match the new grade of the alley intersection. We'd have to, while you can't see it, there's a pretty good slope there associated with adjacent to 136 South Kamen. And so we'd have to regrade that and put up an eco-block wall. And the quote that we received from a local contractor was $30,000. Keeping the scope of work within limits of the platted right-of-way would most likely prohibit large vehicles utilizing this alley as they would not be able to make the turn. And presently, staff does not see a good funding source for this project. Most likely, this does not qualify for URA dollars. So what has staff done to date? So 131 South Wasson applied for a permit application to build a fence. That has been issued. Staff sent a letter to the surrounding neighborhood letting them know of this issue. Informed the neighborhood that Staff was considering identifying both of these alleys as a dead end and then requested feedback. So this council has heard from the two property owners, Mr. Topics and Mr. Hampton, and then one letter in opposition was received. I included that with your staff report. I spoke to her, and that was Ms. Hampton. She wanted to know if the sign was going to be installed and would there be barriers. So we told her that at this time, staff was only recommending signage, no barriers. She was worried about the existing infrastructure and is it located in the platted right-of-way. I informed her that yes, the sanitary sewer is within the limits of the platted right-of-way. And then she was concerned about safety. She knew that some safety vehicles had accessed that alley. Staff reached out to both the fire and the police department, and they had no issues with safety concerns. Staff also met with two property owners who were in opposition of making these two alleys dead ends. They informed them of the $30,000 quote. The property owners offered to provide funding and services to complete the work required to keep the alley a throughway. Staff informed them that the alley intersection is not large enough, so they would have to accommodate extra land. They felt like they could get an extra land from the adjacent owner at 136 South Cayman, and they offered to do that coordination. To date, staff has not received any status, and we have asked for a status. And at that meeting, we also put deadlines, and those deadlines have passed.
Jennifer, what was the deadline? How much time did we give them?
It was in the email that I attached. I believe it was February 15th. Thank you. So in conclusion, the current traveled way infringes onto private property. Staff feels it's cost prohibitive to grade this alley into an intersection. Current widths of the alley are not wide enough to accommodate large vehicles. Closing these alleys to through traffic, while not desirable, will not prevent access to any property. And like I said, our fire and police chief don't see any safety issues with closing these two alleys. Staff's recommendation is making these two alleys dead ends by installing signage. Approximate red stars there on the top picture there, the Wasson intersection with the alley, and down lower picture there at the Michigan intersection with the alley. The one issue that was brought up was by Mr. Topics, and he was concerned with turning around large vehicles, and we could see that that would be a concern, so we would propose grading a little turnout for him, and that's shown in blue, and then also the dark black line is approximately where the fence would go. So with that, I can answer any questions.
So is that all one level, or is it, I mean, does it start to go uphill if you're headed towards, I'm trying to think which street it is. I get them all mixed up and I live out there.
So here is where the slope is, if that's what you're
Slope,
asking.
yeah, that's what I
And
was
then, yes, that goes uphill over here in this platted right-of-way that's not being used at all. So that's what would have to be cut, and that's where the eco wall would have to be installed.
Oh, so that's why you'd have to put the wall in there.
Yeah.
Have the property owners suggested doing that at their expense? Because it would be kind of on their property, would it not?
That's
It really is unclear. I think Mr. Topics told you he'd be open, or he would consider that, I think was his language. But it does hinge on I'm sorry. It does hinge on that property owner at 136 giving up an easement.
Right.
Which we haven't heard anything.
So Jennifer, you first emailed Mr. Hampton and Mr. Toppitz on February 3rd, it looks like, and then you were following up on February 21st. Have you had no communication with them at all since February 3rd?
Other than at the council meeting last week. And I mentioned that I asked for a status, and he said he hadn't received the email yet.
So I was really hoping they'd be here tonight because I'm curious as to why they can't go off of Michigan to get to their property.
They can, it's just not desirable.
I saw them using that yesterday. So they do use it. They were headed into the alleyway off of Michigan. Is it because of, well, it was not towing anything. It was just a pickup truck by one of the property owners.
Did they know that this would be a discussion this evening?
I think it's been shared more than once at council meetings, once when they were both here, that we would schedule it for
Yeah.
tonight, and then at the last council meeting just last week, Mr. Toppitz was advised, and it was reinforced during the meeting.
And I know we make no decisions in these meetings, but will this come before council again? Do we think they'll?
Generally, these do not come before council.
So really, this is the conversation to have.
Yes, if you were looking for maybe a course of action, we could share with them that we're planning to go this route with staff's recommendations. We could revisit it if they were able to come forward with a plan to fund revisions and with appropriate easements on the private property.
I love that idea. I mean, it's hard for me because, I mean, this is a business in Empire, right? So we're always working to, grow Empire and keep businesses there. But I think that your solution, Roger, is great. So if they can help, fix this, and I think you're giving them plenty of time and plenty of notification, but giving them a bit more, I think, is empathetic and speaks to how this city operates.
But Jennifer, if I understand correctly, nothing's really happened as they would like, unless 136 Wasson is willing to give up an easement, and that needs to happen before anything else can be done, right?
Correct.
So I guess it's for them to work these arrangements out with the owner there, and then maybe the city could help in some fashion. But also, Rob mentioned that Michigan's another street that's that they can access this route, just not desirable. What makes it non-desirable? I mean, because the width or what?
I actually drove through there today, Mayor, and that part of the alleyway is more narrow than the other one. And it does have a little bit of a hill going down when you first enter on there.
Is there some way to make it more desirable?
Build a retaining wall.
But anyway, I think it's right now,
limited.
the property owners, it's up for them to take the next actions, I guess, that are to make this a remedy, I guess.
Well, I hate to have, it sounds like staff has put a lot of effort and energy into, a thing that really affects 3 property owners. But like Lucinda, I feel like, we have a business that has improved that area significantly. I mean, if you look all around it, there's other things that could but have not happened in Empire, and that piece of property has improved the area. So can you help me identify which lives at each, or who owns what piece of property? Is 136?
So there was
There's 136, 131.
So Christine's going to pull up the PowerPoint again, and we have identified the property owners. Okay. Okay.
Sorry about that.
So
Okay, there it is.
think the difficulty both are talking about is that if they're closed off and there's no way to drive through both alleyways, they're gonna have to back their trailers, back
Down
up
the
the alley.
yeah. To their properties.
Right.
Well, at least for Mr. Hampton, though, he comes all the way around the corner, he's gonna have to go all the way almost to Michigan and then back up. His driveway goes up the hill there, so he's gonna have to back up that driveway anyway, I would assume.
Yes.
There is an alleyway between the Punt property and Calhoun?
Yeah, that goes all the way through.
Okay. But there is no alleyway between Calhoun and Hampton property?
No.
And that's sloped?
And I think that alleyway on the Calhoun side is not developed.
Is it still platted for city use, or is
Yes.
it would be kind of hard though, because that is sloped, correct? Well, it really is something that needs to be worked out with the neighbors, but
I want
Yeah,
to, again,
136, right? If they got that easement there where it's circled, then they can make that turn, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So, I mean, and that's where, if I understand correctly, they are saying that they can get that easement from that owner. So we're waiting for that to happen.
That's what they've stated.
is there a compromise on getting the easement to actually removing the alleyway between Hampton and Calhoun from city ownership? Because I don't imagine we would ever put a road in there to getting the easement that would.
Is there any utilities in there?
There's sanitary sewer.
So, oh, okay.
There may be some opportunities to, and we discussed that very possibility of narrowing that section of that right of way, as long as it didn't infringe on our utilities or abilities to access them.
I want to thank staff for all the work, because they
Yeah.
did this at our request. So I appreciate all your time and your due diligence. And I know these things, Roger, thank you for the reminder that they typically don't come before us, but it's definitely an interesting process. And I truly am disappointed that neither of the owners are here this evening. So I thought your solution probably is the best solution, and now it's on them to see if they can work with the landowner.
Yeah.
I agree with everything that's been said, and I too don't like to impact Empire businesses, but I think the fact that the city hasn't heard from either one of these individuals since February 3rd is a little concerning to me.
Especially after it came to the council and you said this was a process that would be not normally handled by the council, but by staff. So it was kind of imperative that they communicated when you sent the information, so they knew what was going on. Or maybe they know what's going on, or
Yeah.
maybe they've made an assumption, I don't know. But it sounds like you've put in the effort. Our staff has.
Okay, Mayor, do you have anything else? Oh, Carmen, I didn't see you up there. Do you have anything?
I don't. Just thanks to the staff for working on this. I know this is a puzzle that we got to try to find a solution to, but hopefully the landowners can make it work, and I look forward to hearing from them. And too bad that they aren't here tonight as well, but good thinking outside the box, everybody.
Yep, same, I agree, thank you. I just, when Mr. Thompson was at the council meeting our last council meeting, I think it was indicated that this would come up at our work session today, I believe, did it not?
That is correct.
You're right, so, okay.
All right, do you have what you need from us?
You do have what you
You
need.
do have,
Clear
Oh,
as
I do,
mud.
yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I thought it was, you have anything else for us? No.
all
We
right.
do.
Does anybody else have any comments?
I just want to thank the staff for Zoom. So I've been on it from home, and I can definitely hear the mayor more clearly. And so thank you so much for all the efforts to change it and the investment that you're making in this space. It has not gone unnoticed, so thank you.
And the
I'm glad I
improvement
helped.
in sound from last week to this week, even Mr. Kilmer said he could hear. And he tells me all the time he can't hear me, so
How
I
many
don't know
years
if
have you
that's-
been married?
34 years, something like that.
Lucinda, I'm glad I'm the only one you want to hear from, so that's very nice.
I didn't
Thank
say that, Mr. Mayor. I just said I heard you.
you. Oh, I see, okay.
All right, we're going off the rails, so meeting's adjourned.
Thanks. Have a good night, everyone.
Taking it back.
Thanks, everyone.